I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to the ultimate episode of Old's Oscar Countdown for this fourth season of the 2020 Oscars. And they've happened. The Oscars have occurred. We've got our winners, and now give my first sort of thoughts, reactions, my opinions of the show, the surprises and snubs, and sort of what we expected to happen. And then how this will sort of shape and do the future of the Oscars and how that will impact it next year. But this is not the end of the show. As I do every single year, I always continue to upload on this channel and with a new series. And this series, what I'm going to be doing this year, is called the Top 10 of the 2010s, where essentially I'm going to be talking about some of the best movies of the decade, where I break them down into their different genres and different categories, and I talk about them there. So, for example, I'm going to be talking about the top 10 best action adventure movies for the next 3 weeks. So this Friday, we're going to be talking about some honorable mentions, including my picks from 10 to 7. The next week will be my picks from 6 to 2. And then the next week after that will be a sole episode on what I think is the best action movie of the 2010s. And then we're going to go into sci-fi and fantasy and what's the best comedy of the 2010s, and really go down and break it down and go into depth. Maybe there are going to be some Oscar winners and some of your favorite movies. So subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. But the big award, the big surprise, Parasite, ultimately comes through and wins, winning that surprise Best Director, which was very shocking to me, and then of course Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best International Feature Film. This was a different path that I haven't seen, and really this is, in a lot of ways, a monumental type of Oscars. People often criticize that the Oscars don't actually pick the best movies of the year, and when we're actually reflecting back on the decade, we're thinking about movies like The King's Speech or The Artist, or some people may even say Green Book last year, don't actually represent the year in movies and won't sort of stand the test of time, which the Oscars are sort of notable for doing, even if you go back all the way to the 60s and the 50s. Oftentimes they choose movies that feel like they're very much of the moment, but then for some reason just don't last. But I think for a lot of people, they really appreciate Parasite, and sort of, at least in the critical community and the fan response, people are really resonating with this movie. So to see it really break a lot of barriers, in my opinion, Parasite was one of my favorite movies of the year. I thought it was an incredible movie, and I'm really happy and really glad it did win. Especially, beating out, say, that 1917 frontrunner. Not that I dislike 1917, I just personally prefer Parasite a little bit more. But what this tells us actually for the Oscars is a lot of things. Every single year the Academy has sort of broadening their reach. They've been introducing a lot more international members. They've been trying to increase their amount of diversity, but it hasn't been occurring that much. We haven't necessarily been seeing the changes. Now, back in 2016, when Moonlight won, people thought, oh, this is that kind of year. Finally, the big Hollywood musical La La Land doesn't win. We're getting this smaller movie. This is a sign to come. But then The Shape of Water won, and then Green Book won last year, and then people, including myself, sort of lost a little bit of hope. Like, this Moonlight was the exception. There are still sort of these traditional Oscar movies that will win, and there's still a large voting body that will pick these kinds of films. But for some reason this year, Parasite in a lot of ways got rid of sort of the science and the things that you've been trying to predict and trying to use numbers and things like that. It actually went against it. In a lot of ways, it was an anomaly. Starting off with, we'll go with that Best Picture win. It has SAG coming into it. It had the WGAs. So SAG is one of the big three. Winning that is an important sign, but it is notable that it did lose a DJ, did lose a PJ, also lost a BAFTA. So there wasn't sort of a whole lot of strength for Parasite. As a matter of fact, the 1917 wave was sort of the big strength in terms of numbers, which is why I chose it. PGA is a historically incredibly accurate group. DGA is pretty accurate too, and SAG has been becoming less and less accurate. But what ultimately the sort of takeaways we can take away from it is that sometimes there's just things that have to sort of stay every single year. That Best Editing Award still holds up, and still a testament. Best Actor, now 1917 didn't have any acting support. Parasite didn't have any acting nominations, but it did win for SAG, so it had the acting support. It also had some of those technical categories. Another sort of connection was, once again, screenplay and picture line up beautifully. So next year, try to remember, when we're thinking about movies that are going to maybe win Best Screenplay, you also, and maybe want to predict that for Best Picture, because now we're often seeing that connection between screenplay and picture more than we are seeing that director picture. But this year, again, we did see that director picture lineup with Bong Joon-ho and Parasite winning, of course, for Best Picture. And in a lot of ways, Parasite was the #2 sort of close frontrunner with 1917. I think the numbers sort of supported 1917, but there was a huge Parasite buzz that people were really feeling. So that was not necessarily the huge surprise, but the huge surprise for me personally was Bong Joon-ho winning for Best Director. This just goes against sort of the history of the DGAs predicting the Best Director award. They must always line up. They've been incredibly accurate over their long-standing history, only sort of missing a couple times. In this decade, there was only 2 misses, as a matter of fact. So this is now making it a 3rd miss, and the explanation is not necessarily super obvious, except for the fact that maybe when we're looking at these movies, the guilds, for the most part, are largely American and don't factor in a lot of these international voters who are becoming more and more active and more involved within the Academy, which is why we see a movie like Roma do so well, which is why we see a movie like Parasite do so well. So in a lot of ways, this makes the Oscars exciting, much more harder to predict, because, you know, when we're talking about it next year, we're going to be like, well, the numbers say this, but then again, Bong Joon-ho won and just sort of came out of nowhere. I mean, he didn't even win the Globes, he didn't win DGA, he didn't win anywhere really, yet all of a sudden he comes in here and wins, and also wins screenplay. So they liked the movie enough, they liked him enough that they wanted to reward him twice. It also is a monumental occasion because it's the first foreign film to ever win Best Picture. So that shows that, you know, the Academy maybe is not as stodgy and old-fashioned as we thought, and that they are sort of changing and they are evolving, and that movies like Parasite, who are challenging and different and unique, that are very still entertaining, but still a foreign film, it's still different, it's still, you know, unlike any other movie that the Academy has rewarded Best Picture. It shows us that the Academy is changing. It shows us that these kinds of movies can win, and the best critically acclaimed movie of the year oftentimes doesn't win Best Picture, but here it seems like it did. Big congrats to Parasite, and I'm personally very happy with this result. Then going into the acting races, as expected, as I predicted. So overall in the night I went 18 out of 24, which isn't a great result, but there are some surprises. And if I predicted The Irishman for visual effects, 1917 won for visual effects instead, and it was pretty much a coin toss between the 2 movies. So there are some situations where it's like, I went with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for best original screenplay, they went with Parasite. Not necessarily surprising, and the point of this series in a lot of ways is not only to foster a great film community, but just give you the options, give you the knowledge, give you the information to hear my opinion, why I'm picking certain things, but also just to give you the information so you can make your own personal decisions. And I love hearing your picks in the past videos, and that's what you seemingly did, and I'd love to create this sort of great Oscar community that we've been doing so far. But the acting races were as expected, as I predicted. The only sort of one I was personally invested in was maybe Joaquin Phoenix for Joker, because I'm a big fan of him as an actor. And even though his acceptance speech was weird and all over the place, I did think he was his most genuine yet. I also thought that he's an actor who just definitely deserves it in an incredible performance in Joker. With the rest, I'm glad Laura Dern got an Oscar. I'm glad Brad Pitt got an Oscar. So glad to see those people win ultimately too. The screenplay categories went as predicted for the most part. I mean, Parasite won BAFTA and WGA and then wins here, so not a huge total upset. Jojo Rabbit was expected for Best Adapted Screenplay. That happened there. Cinematography was a lock, went to 1917, but glad to see Roger Deakins, the legend, get another Oscar, well deserved. Best Animated Film. This was such a weird year overall. I wasn't sure where they're going to go. They don't really like sequels. Claws has been doing so well. It won BAFTA. BAFTA has been super accurate for Best Animated Film, and then it just went to Toy Story 4. So the sort of general rule that Pixar movies, when they get nominated, often win, despite being sequels, despite being anything, it still holds true. So definitely for next year, I'm not sure if Soul is coming out next year, confirmed, or is it just Onward, but definitely watch out for sort of those Pixar movies that are original and unique and different, and if they get nominated, they very much could win. Best Documentary went to American Factory, which I predicted correctly. Now, I thought this one could go many different ways, but I'm glad to see American Factory get the win here. It was ultimately a really great movie and my favorite documentary of the year personally. Best International Film went to Parasite, obviously. Best Editing, Ford v Ferrari. Glad to see that get a win here, and 2 wins actually. Also correctly predicted this one, and a large reason why I predicted this was because I thought that they wanted to give Ford v Ferrari something. I thought that they wanted to spread the love, and I thought that they always want to, in recent years, spread the wealth, and that's what they did here. 8 out of the 9 nominees won, but what didn't win? The Irishman. I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, because The Irishman is maybe my personal favorite out of all the Best Picture nominees. If you saw my Connors series where I went down and talked about some of my favorite movies and performances of the year, I was a big Irishman fan, came up in a lot of categories. So to see it go over 10, to get 10 nominations and not even get a visual effects, not even get maybe a surprise screenplay, was very disappointing for me. You know, Martin Scorsese reteaming with all these amazing, legendary actors and collaborators to produce something that is totally different and unique and sort of a blending of his styles. An entertaining but really sort of reflective and meditative movie was such a really a unique experience. I thought that it wasn't a Goodfellas, it wasn't Wolf of Wall Street, it was something different from a filmmaker who's made so many great movies. And I just sort of very disappointed that it didn't get recognized, but what I was very excited about was Bong Joon-ho's acceptance speech. I mean, essentially had a standing ovation for Martin Scorsese, so in a way he kind of won it, or at least of course got that recognition that he so well deserved for this incredible film. So disappointed, that was my main disappointment of the night, was The Irishman going home empty-handed, but still glad to see Ford v Ferrari, an excellent movie with excellent technical craft, get in for that best editing win. Now, best visual effects, I was really into The Irishman. I thought that was going to win here. For me, it was The Irishman or 1917. I went to 1917, so I was wrong about that one. But it did show us for the future of the Oscars that my rule, and the sort of the rule that has been existing, that Best Picture nominees almost always win this category if they're nominated. And if it's not a Best Picture nominee, it's the most Best Picture like a First Man, like a Blade Runner 2049. So that rule still holds up for that part. Best Production Design, I correctly predicted Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is an excellent job there. Costume Design, Little Woman from Jacqueline Duran. Glad to see Little Woman get recognized here, especially because the costumes are so well done. Best Makeup and Hairstyling, of course, went to Bombshell, which was obvious, but you know what they did with Charlize Theron to turn her into Megyn Kelly, which is absolutely extraordinary. Then Best Score, Joker. You know, this was one that I sort of begrudgingly used my head to vote and predict that, even though it wasn't maybe my favorite score of the year. Still a fan of that movie and glad I got another Oscar. Best Song, I'm Gonna Love Me Again. I'm just going to use this point to talk about the incredible amount of songs that were here at this show. I mean, I think there was like over 10 songs. You know, there was the normal 5 that they would sing normally, and then there was like montages for scores, and then there was just a montage of music and movies. It was so weird. It was so strange. I thought it was very out of the blue. Why were we rewarding songs? Why were we having so many singers and freestyle rap going on when we're here to reward movies, and why can't we show montages of movies, or maybe have some more host bits or things like that? It was weird that they were really sort of trying to rush on the awards to create more songs and more singing. I don't know if that's going to affect the ratings at all, but that sort of just really bothered me in a lot of ways, just sort of confused why there was so much singing at this award show, seemingly for no reason. Then the best sound editing and sound mixing. This was a little bit of a surprise, and there wasn't necessarily a huge wave as to, we thought, you know, Ford v Ferrari was going to get both, or 1917 was going to get both. You know, I thought for the most part, especially if 1917 were to win Best Picture, it would win both these categories. Now, with it not winning, you know, in the middle of the award show for sound editing was sort of a sign that 1917 may not win, that it's not as strong as we think, because they already gave Ford v Ferrari something, but they wanted to give it something else. I wouldn't have picked sound editing either. I probably would have picked sound mixing, because the Cinema Audio Society, the Sound Mixing Guild, gave their award to Ford v Ferrari, and actually the Sound Editors Guild was split between 1917 and Ford v Ferrari. But weirdly, they sort of did editing and mixing. The fact is that 1917, Best Picture war movie, won a sound award. That's almost a guarantee. Every time you have a Best Picture war movie, it will win at least one sound award. So glad to see that rule exists. And then the shorts, I got all 3 shorts right, but can't comment too much on that. But overall, very glad to see Parasite get that win, that bit of a surprise win, and Bong Joon-ho get that, you know, that well-deserved win. And I hope more people check out Parasite because of this. Overall, I enjoyed some of the acting wins at the end of the day. You know, at the end of the day, I'm glad Joaquin Phoenix won for Joker. I'm glad Brad Pitt finally got an Oscar. Disappointed overall that The Irishman was sort of, you know, left out empty-handed in the show. It was a little bit strange in terms of the amount of singing and stuff like that, but ultimately I enjoyed myself, and I hope you enjoyed all my criticisms and my analysis of this whole award season. Comment below, let me know. What were your thoughts on the Oscar race? I'm so glad you have come along this sort of journey this entire time. Subscribe to the channel, because I really think my new series, Top 10 of the 2010s, is going to be unique, it's going to be different. I'm going to be experimenting, maybe doing it sort of this traditional setup where I'm talking to the camera. Sometimes I'm going to be maybe trying to do different things in terms of inserting more clips or just narration throughout the entire time, or sort of going back and forth. But it's going to be movies that you've all seen, probably action movies, like, you know, I'm going to be talking about The Raid or Mad Max or Mission Impossible, some of the best of the decade that I think you should see, and then maybe some movies you haven't seen, and you can get some unique recommendations, some unique analysis. I'm very excited for that show, so subscribe, give it a chance, and once again, thank you for coming along the Oscars with me for the 4th annual year. I hope you enjoyed your time, and until next time, stay tuned.